I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to report on things that the mainstream media really doesn't want you to know anything about, where we try to recover some lost history, and where we try to explain the inexplicable. So first of all, thank you for joining us, whether you're watching us on the video version of this podcast or on one of the streaming platforms for the audio version of the podcast. We appreciate your time and we value it, and we want to hear from you. So be sure to subscribe to us and leave us a rating. It's important to us. Let us know what you want us to cover, what you want us to look at. A change of gears. We're not talking about public corruption today. We had a great show last week with Christina Urso. Today, very importantly, we're going to look at recovering some lost history. It's my opinion, and I've done a bunch of study in the world of history, it's my opinion that one of the most overlooked of America's wars, other than, at least in living memory, it would be the Korean War. But if you go back 100 plus years, it's World War I. In fact, for years and years, there wasn't even a national memorial or monument. You had to go out to Kansas City, Missouri to look at a World War I monument of any substantial size. But that's all changing. Right now it's changing. And I'm happy to introduce Sabin Howard, who is the sculptor for our National World War I Memorial. Sabin, welcome to On Watch.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Chris. Appreciate this.
This is a wonderful opportunity for Americans, first of all, to appreciate your artwork, your rendering of what the World War I experience was for Americans. So there's the artistic expression of that, but then there's also a moment to kind of pause and reflect on what World War I meant to the United States and what the consequences of it are now, what our current contemporary environment is based upon that World War I experience. Most importantly, you were in a competition. You actually won a competition to craft and sculpt and then create this incredible bronze memorial. It's a 60-foot long bronze piece. Tell us about how you got to do it and where you are in the process right now.
So we started back in 2015. It was a blind competition run by the Centennial Commission, and 360 global teams, design teams joined. There was an elimination period that began in June of 2015, and the 5 finalists were selected September, and then you had to go through a presentation process with them. In January 20th, around there, of 2016, we were nominated as the commission party. Joe Weishart, a young kid, 25 years old, not even with an architectural license. And I guess I'm called the seasoned veteran, the sculptor. And looking back right now, this is literally a miracle that this happened, because this type of work does not get done these days. We have done something that is very, very traditional, that is reminiscent of the sculptures in front of the Capitol, the Schrady sculptures. And the type of work that I do is done with your heart, head, and hands. It's with clay. We use live models. We sculpt traditionally from them, and from there, then they go to a foundry and they get cast using the lost wax technique, and then patinaed, reassembled, and shipped back to Washington, which will happen September 13th of this coming year. We'll have an unveiling that night. And this is not only a sculpture, it is also a whole park that got refurbished, rebuilt, restructured to accept the focus of the focal point, which would be this 60-foot long memorial called A Soldier's Journey.
So a couple of things I want to talk about. Number one is, in my opinion, there's an awful lot of, I'll just say, stuff out there, whether it's memorials, artwork, et cetera, that sort of is this, deconstructive interpretation of something, and you look at it and you wonder, what were they trying to express? What were they trying to get at here? You are the polar opposite of that. You have created artwork that is not, some abstract, deconstructed thing or some brutalist expression. I always think of the Housing and Urban Development building a couple of blocks from where I'm sitting, which looks like something out of East Berlin. What you've done, though, is a traditional, very powerful 60-foot long bronze, and you've captured, moments of quiet thoughtfulness into action and movement, into the brutality of war, into sort of the post-war recovery. You've done the entire gamut of the World War I experience in one enormous 60-foot bronze. Am I describing this accurately?
No, it is correct. What we have done is a complete anomaly to what's actually been going on for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
So if you discuss like what has happened in the art world, and not only in this country but globally, this catastrophic event of World War I, where 22 million people are decimated, and the whole concept of divine order goes out the window and is replaced by this hopelessness that is modern man. And if you look at the Camus and Sartre, philosophers out of France, it's the end of anything God, higher power, a belief in something that it keeps the universe cohesive as one unit. So you have this fracturing of the unification of the whole universe, and you move into this alienation of modern man. And so I came up with a story. Behind me is the maquette. This is it. It's a 5-foot model that explains it, but it's starting on that side. You can't see it. The first scene is a dad who departs from his family, and he's the first figure, and the last figure are the daughter. And so the first scene is the family, where the dad kneels in front of the daughter and asks for her forgiveness as he steps into this new role of being a soldier. The next scene, the dad is caught between the family, his wife, the heroic mom, and the men who are the Brotherhood of Arms.
Right.
So he's pulled right in the middle of this. And so this is the first section of it. And this whole thing unfolds and flows like a movie. As you walk from left to right, the story is like obvious to it's an 8th grader. Anybody who comes to Washington is going to understand the story. It's very, very clear. And I did 18 iterations. I took 12,000 pictures. I used models that were in motion to tell this story. And the next scene is very, very kinetic. It's an explosive battle scene, and led by the dad, who's the very center of the whole composition. The next scene is a cost of war. And after the cost of war comes the dad, who is now shell-shocked. He's walking directly out at you, at the viewer. And that's the real focus of this whole 60-foot sculpture, because that dad is not only a father in a family, he's also an allegory for the United States and the world. There is this transformation from this war. I just talked about how we changed our view of who we are as humans.
Right.
And so he has this look of what just happened, and he's frozen in space. And so this is the United States changing, the globe changing, the philosophy of who we are changing, and the father changing. So there are 4 levels at least, and there could be many more. And then the next scene is the flag scene, where they return in a parade. And the final scene is the daughter, who stands there alone, accepting the helmet from her dad, and she's the next generation. And that is World War II, because we step into World War II from World War I. It's a direct of World War I.
Right.
So, look, I got this mission. My mission was very clear from Centennial Commission. I was asked to do something that I'm going to be very easy to understand. Please do something that's not boring, that has a lot of movement, that will get people excited. Get them to go home and then do more research on what actually happened in World War I. So we, as a country, only lost 116,000 men. 4.5 million men went and women went over to Europe. And at that moment in time, that was a lot.
Sure.
But in terms of like how many casualties we suffered compared to the European arena, they lost so many more people than the United States. And then we move into like the Great Depression. So then it's like World War One's like backseat. Nobody's paying attention because in our history, the Great Depression usurps what happened in World War One.
Right.
Nobody paid attention to it. So there's no World War One memorial, even though it changed the whole world and how we see ourselves. And so then this guy, Edwin Fountain, is running around the mall 15 years ago, and there's no World War One memorial.
Right.
He gets in touch with the last surviving member of World War One, Frank Buckles. They go to Congress. They sign legislation. Obama passes it, and federal land is appointed at the park, which is right in front of the Willard. It's called Pershing Park. It's a rundown park by a landscape architect made in the 70s. And that's when it starts.
And apropos, General Pershing
Yes.
is featured in a statue in that park as well.
Yeah. But this is a really different memorial than the general. This is not about any historical figures. This is
Right.
about the everyday person.
The experience, it's the
Yes.
American experience in World
Yes.
War One, right?
Yes. And so I didn't sculpt something generic. I went out and found soldiers, actually. I found veterans that were combat ready. They had come out of Afghanistan. They had come out of Iraq. They served, they had PTSD, and I learned a lot from them. And I took them as my reference and my life models to make the sculpture. And here's the sad part. What I do, it doesn't exist anymore. This type of art where you're able to draw from life, you're looking at like old masters out of the Renaissance, like Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael.
Right.
That's a thing of the past. So I'm here to change that.
That's wonderful.
I'm playing it forward.
That is so important because what I started out talking about, this sort of deconstruction and this abstract nonsense, you are shunning that and you are bringing
Yes.
back what people think of as the old masters, right?
Yeah.
And so, as we're talking in this interview, my production team is dropping in both video and still imagery from your website, so that our viewers can get a handle on or get samples of and see what you're talking about from all of your work. And there's great imagery there, and so our viewers and listeners will be able to see that. I think what's so important is what you just described, which is sort of, I always view World War I as sort of the beginning of this kind of slow motion suicide of Western civilization and the impact that it has. I mean, today we are realizing the consequences of what happened in World War I. And I just want to touch on, this is not, I mean, you show this motion, you show the physicality of what's going on, you capture the sentiment like between the family members, between the daughter and the dad, et cetera. But there's an incredible personal connection. You talked about the fact that you used current day soldiers, veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And so over your shoulder right now, the faces of those men, those are real live, you said a Ranger and a Marine who you used to model those figures.
That's right. So it's what happened. I did this starting in '82. I entered into the art world at 19, and I had no idea about modern art. I didn't because I grew up in Italy. My mother's Italian. What I had seen was Michelangelo, the Medici tomb. I'd seen the David. So I had this vision of what art was. It's like, so it's not what's going on in the United States.
Right.
And so it's like a city like Florence would make a sculpture like David to represent their people and show the positive aspect of their culture, to bring their country together and elevate their citizens, because they thought that if we created art in cities that elevate and increase the beauty within our citizens, they will go out into the world and be more productive and happier people. The government at that point was, there are lots of problems in government always, as you know, but the government did not use fear as a mode of moving forward with their people and citizens. They used the idea of power and beauty and elegance to elevate them. I'm not saying that they were perfect at all,
No.
but I took that model of Renaissance art, which speaks about our possibilities, about what we can be, and I applied it to this project. And I'm doing this because I've been doing it for 40 years. And this is the first time that I have stepped outside of my studio. I stepped out in 2015 to take this project on because I realized that doing what I did in a studio would not serve a larger group of people. And the thing that I have learned that has struck me the most in this development as an artist is that you need to do something that is for we the people. The art of the Renaissance was for we the people, even though it was done by a very lofty group of people. The Medici would, be the patrons of Michelangelo and Leonardo, but it was done for we the people. So I made a piece of art that is elegant, graceful, powerful, and it is not for the elites of this world. It is for the everyday person who comes to Washington looking for the history of this country. And it is a unifier. It is not something to fracture and say this group and that group. No. When people went to World War I, there were no Democrats, there were no Republicans. They were purely Americans. They came from all over the world, and they were one unified country with the label of American. And so I'm making an art that plays forward the Renaissance in America. And I think that that's quite extraordinary. And that's why I said this is really a miracle that this is happening, because this is being dropped 150 yards from the White House on September 13th.
It's tremendous.
Right in the middle of our country.
It is tremendous. What you just expressed with regard to the unifying factors and the symbolism and the fact that, in the woke America of 2023, you're dismissing all the noise and all the sort of boutique ideologies and all the craziness, and you're talking about what's the American experience, what are the unifying factors,
yes.
And really, this type of art is inspirational. There is the touch, the hint of the divine in it, right? It takes man outside of himself,
yeah.
And it causes them to appreciate and understand that, as I've said in another interview, there's a God and it's not you, right? This is something bigger than us, and this is something a whole nation moved to and through. So it's extremely inspirational. I have a question for you. Besides these real life characters who you worked into using as models, you worked into your sculpture. To me, looking at this, and I've examined it very closely on video and still photography, there's incredible attention to detail. The uniforms, the weapons, the equipment, the boots. You weren't guessing at this. You have taken this down in very precise terms for authenticity. Of the actual the physicality, the material of what your models are wearing.
Yes, there's no idea. This is not an amorphous ideology where you look at the art and you have to go read a book. Okay, so let's make something super clear here. My job is I'm an artist and I make visual art. I'm a human being and I get most of my sensory perception from my eyes. This is not the way the world runs anymore. Everything is run through the eyes of technology. So technology is supposed to make our lives easier, but in some cases, I could make the argument that it detracts from our humanity because it doesn't allow us to experience our reality, and our perception of reality comes through our brains, through our senses, especially through our eyes. So the type of art that I do is completely driven by my perception, my eyes, and how I see things. And how I see things is driven by my education. And my education is built on the Renaissance, the Greeks, and the Romans. And I got this education back in the 80s in Philadelphia, which was a figurative hotbed in this country. So why was it dismissed and seen as unimportant to us, to all humanity, to all the human beings? Why were we fed a narrative where technology will develop us and play us forward to a higher level of being? Okay, I'll explain very clearly because it's connected to finance. There is not a lot of money in art schools to make art students that are very good at doing visual art. So I'm one of the lucky few. I'm like the Michael Jordan of the art world, where I was able to reach that really, really high level because I'm an extremely determined and workaholic type artist. So that drove me then to keep developing my skills and my craft. And I'm saying this because our country needs to take this into consideration. We were doing really well in the 50s globally because we were a great production source in the world. And as an artist, I'm doing quite well because of this memorial, because I do a very good job with the visual production of this piece and the visual narrative that it plays forward. And I take into consideration not only one group of people, I take into consideration all people, uneducated, all races, all ethnicities, and my work is understood on many levels. That's the same thing as Michelangelo's Last Judgment or Sistine Chapel. What are the longest lines to look at art? They're in Rome, at the Vatican. They're at the Uffizi in Florence. They have lines for 5-6 blocks. People will line up to go look at it because it still has value. I need to do something that has value for the people that go look at it. Here's the other thing I learned in my project. I'm in service of something greater than myself. I'm in service of those people, we the people. I make art for the people. I'm in service of the veterans of our country, and I'm in service of a higher power, and I'm in service of the guides that made the art for 2,000 years prior to me. I didn't cut off the past and start at zero. I look at history and I say, okay, what can I learn from history? How can I go forward with this? Well, how can I take this and play it forward and be part of that trajectory? I'm not starting at zero like the modernists do. It's really dangerous to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Why isn't anybody else speaking about this?
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And one of the things that I really appreciate, to me, is just astounding, is that when I look at the figures behind you, directly behind you, or I look at the entire 60-foot long bronze, I realize and I think to myself, your hands, literally, your hands, the individual, the human being, your hands sculpted the chin strap, the helmet, the uniform blouse,
everything, every inch,
every single spot that you look at is an expression of you trying to capture what happened, what went on, what they felt, what they thought, what they experienced, and convey that in a way that is meaningful to virtually anybody that walks by and glances over, whether they're there deliberately going to go visit and they want to experience it or appreciate it, or they're busy rushing to a meeting in Washington and they glance over and they say, holy cow, what is that? They don't even know what they're looking at, but it catches their attention. But it's your hands that made that happen.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the phrase from St. Francis is, craftsman is someone who just uses his hands and his head. An artist is one who uses his heart, head, and hands.
Exactly.
So there is emotion, and there are rules and structures that I work within. I work with anatomy, the proportions of the figure, the muscular skeletal system, and how it can give a gesture, and that gesture is a language. And the reason that I'm very, worked up about this is because this is cut out of the system. It's cut out of the art school system. And the failure is that then you don't have any way for an artist to become integrated into society because they need to do something that has value.
Right.
And so the value here that I'm talking about is I'm not just doing this alone. in my studio. I'm doing this I have to grow. I was not ready for the project when I got in it. I made things that were esoteric, that played too much into the Greek and the Roman theories, but that was my education. So then when I got into this thing, I had to make figures that are like in movement and kinetic and dramatic. And so what is emotion? Emotion is motion. And that's what I learned how to do because I was forced because of the job. You meet with people that are not artists and they tell you, no, that doesn't work. And they don't say, well, that in a nice way. You go to meeting after meeting in Washington, and either you grow up
Yeah.
and you see, okay, what do I got to do to get to the next level, or you'll walk away from it. And that's the thing that I think is also a wonderful thing in this project, because you can apply this to anything. Life is not easy. And to get to a higher level as a human being, you need to go through a process, and that process is not gentle. You have to take your lumps and bumps, and from those experiences, you grow, and you're able to apply your craft, whatever the job may be, to what you're doing. And so, given this project, I was able to apply I did 80,000 hours of looking at life models before this. And then I was able to do this for the last, 9 years, run a shop, train Charlie Mostow, work alongside my wife, Tracy Slotton, and all the other people that were part of my organization. We became a team that saw what we had to do. And so we're doing something that extends beyond the walls here. And we give everything we possibly can to this project because it's so valuable to so many people out there.
And you've got to have tremendous sense of satisfaction that when this is done and when it's finally installed and established in our nation's capital, just really feet from the White House, at least in our ability to sort of understand it in the here and now, what you've done, what your memorial, your sculpture, I mean, it's forever.
Yeah, but I'm already thinking, how can I do this better? I want to do the next project. I have a hard time.
That's your professionalism. Always looking to make it better. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this is done. It's like, yes, that is the unveiling is very important. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Please.
And it's not about me. That this is in service of, and this is in service of the troops and veterans of the past, the ones that served 100 plus years ago.
Sure.
We ended the war in 1918. And this is also for the men and women that will go see it today. And those people will be recognized for the most noble thing that you can do. What is it? To serve one's country to the fullest ability possible, physically and mentally. And most of the people that come back from war are damaged physically and mentally. And we have trained our troops to enter into battle in war. But we have not trained our troops how to re-enter into society. And some of the veterans that I worked with tried to commit suicide, walked away from suicide, and then rehabilitated themselves, not through the VA, through the 18, pills, 18 different drugs that they were given that would leave them in a zombie state, but through hard work and dedication on a daily basis.
Absolutely, yep.
And so the night of September 13th, I will be doing a candlelit vigil with the Centennial Commission, and we will honor the veterans, and I encourage all veterans to come to that evening to see this memorial and to become part of something greater than themselves and be recognized for who they are as individuals. And this all goes back to the type of art that I make, which is hierarchical. There is a sense of unity. This is 38 figures, but it is one sculpture. So this is what I'm saying. All those men and women that serve will come to that event and see the sculpture. They are all individual beings with their own perception and their own history, but they will all be part of that group. And that group is one group of veterans, all Americans. Not whatever you want to call in this wacko culture that we're living in right now.
Right.
This is a sculpture for Americans, and it is by Americans, for Americans, and so that is we the people. That's what the sculpture represents.
That is
very constitutional.
And it's beautifully expressed by you just now. And I think the other thing that people may not realize or appreciate is that these are not segments or panels, or when this is done, this is one enormous single piece of bronze.
That's right.
Now explain that. How in the world can you get one enormous piece of bronze running 60 feet? To me, that's mind-boggling.
Oh, I did figures for, from 20, about 32, 33 years, figures, individual figures. So when you do a sculpture, it's made up of thousands of components. You have to subdivide those components into all these parts, and as an artist, you label them. Like, for example, on the leg, you have the femur bone. Then you have rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, hamstring muscles, gluteal muscles. These are all parts of the legs and the hips.
Sure.
So you break the body down into all these sections. But at the end of the day, when you walk away from that sculpture, it has to look like it's one figure functioning, comprehensively, one gesture, one mindset, one philosophy. That figure tells the story. It's unified. All these parts are unified. So the sculpture, yes, it's worked in very, very fine detail in all these parts, but you have to integrate all these feelings of sadness, heroism, all the emotions, the whole gamut that we run, anger, shock, all these things have to flow together seamlessly. So you have stories, and then these stories have to flow. So then in the very middle of the figure, the very middle figure of the whole composition is this man who's screaming, and he's leading his troops forward, and he's in full battle charge. You have 3 feet. And the next grouping is a pietà. It's a dying or dead soldier being held by a medic and another soldier. Complete quiet, complete opposite. And then the next scene is a nurse holding a gassed soldier who's kneeling up. And then you have the shell-shocked figure. So there's the narrative was worked out very, very in detail. It had such depth, and this is because I was pounded by a commission that asked for a story, and the story continued to develop, and their ideologies came through so that the story would be human and also tell something about how our country did win. I could not make the ending just complete chaos and destruction. It had to also an upliftment and a return. So all these elements work together to tell a complete story. And the Alpha and Omega is the daughter. It's the next generation.
Right.
Dad is the main protagonist. He appears 6 times. You recognize his face. You recognize the gestures. All these things are done taking the figures off the wall, cutting them up, dissecting them, and then putting them all back together. It's the way I was trained.
It's amazing is what it is.
My education.
It is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Sabin Howard, sculptor of our National World War I Memorial. 13th of September this coming year, 2024, will be the unveiling. Sabin, I want to give you the last word. We've covered a lot of stuff. We've covered the history of it and the psychology of it, really, but also the materiality of what you've done, all the effort of it, what you've tried to convey from a very high level philosophically all the way down to sort of the mechanics of how you sculpt it physically with your hands. But broad brushstroke, but down to the specifics, I want to give you the very last word for our viewing and listening audience. You are creating something that memorializes literally, but also conveys a message that will be seen for Lord knows how many years. It's an enormous honor, but it's also a huge responsibility. And so to me, it's very important that the viewing and listening public understand from you what your message is with respect to this this 9-year-long work of love and passion on your part to get this message out. The last word goes to you.
Thank you, Chris, for that. I've already spoken the last words throughout this interview. I work from a place that is the past, and I play it forward. My main interest here is to create something of sacredness for we the people, so that anyone, no matter what their education or their age, will understand it. And the other element here that is very, very critical, it is done for those people that go visit the memorial. You will not need a book when you look at this art, because it is visual art, and you will understand it immediately. It will also be visceral, and it will not be boring. It will not be something of the past, but it is where we stand right now in this very moment. And culture and art were made initially to lead the real world. They were showing us what we could be, about rising to the occasion and how we could proceed. And that is what this piece of art is for. It is to show us how we can be, how this country can be, and what we can play forward. And it is all about values that are traditional, that speak of Western civilization, and playing those ideologies forward. It is not something to be thrown out. It is something to be played forward and thought about. And last thing here, before it gets too wordy, it's better to be creative than to be destructive. And that's what this piece is about.
That is tremendous. Exactly correct. Sabin Howard, sculptor of our United States National World War I Memorial. Thank you for your time on Watch.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on tonight.
I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.